It is Monday, October 29th, 2018. It is 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and so you know what time it is. It's time for a little bit of coin metal. And it was a very productive get your ass kicked at Jiu-Jitsu Monday. We were doing some stuff from the guard today, and I enjoyed every single bit of it, man. We were doing these combinations from, like I said, from the guard, where you reach in there and you get your opponent's lapel, and you drag it up under one of their arms, reach over the back, and then play from there. And today was a little easier day. It was kind of weird because instruction and energy wise, it was a little more intense and a little more precise. I was way more attentive on trying to get it precisely in there. As far as making sure I got my grip on the other side of the lapel right and all that kind of stuff. And so anyway, it was a little more exciting in that aspect, but at the same time, it was a little bit slower, a little more technical. And so yeah, like I said, I enjoyed pretty much everything we did today. I didn't do the arm triangle worth of shit from that angle though. I had to work my triangle, man. It's not my favorite choke. And triangles and arm bars, I sometimes I have trouble getting my legs up and over on it, and so I'm more into like Kimuras, Americanas, that kind of stuff. But it's just because I really love the top position and the dominance of a good side control. But anyway, the gentleman that I was rolling with tonight, it was a unique pleasure because he's actually one of the people that does like additional training with some of the people that roll at the gym for. I'm not entirely certain if he's like an assistant coach or just like a competition training coach or something. I don't know, but people work with him privately and they come back and they're much more technical afterward. And so like I said, I had the rare pleasure of rolling with him today, and I was kind of self-conscious because I'm always worried that I'm using too much strength, and I really did rely a lot on my strength when I was rolling with him today. I only consider it fortunate that I didn't end up in an armbar or a triangle. I managed to negate both submissions, because he tried to get me multiple times with the armbar. That's what I was saying. It was like, no, it was more than 2 attempts. It was more like 4 or 5 attempts, and and so. I want to try and get to. I would really love to get to a point sometime in the near future, or maybe even like a year from now would be cool, to where I'm not perpetually in a defensive posture in my mind, to where, because I barely had a little window where, I had him in really, really tight. I had him in my guard. I had the grip over his shoulder, and so he was pretty locked in. He still managed to negotiate his way out, but it was a lot tougher for him than I think, it would have otherwise been if I was a much weaker person. But anyway, he's very, very good, and like I said, it was a rare pleasure to get a chance to roll with him. I can definitely tell where the extra skill comes from, because it's so funny. He'll go from like a limp noodle to like a garrote around your fucking neck in milliseconds, and it's like you don't see it coming, you don't feel it coming. It's just all of a sudden, oh, he's got my arm, he's got my arm, he's got my arm, he's got my leg, he's got my neck. It always surprises me that the kind of stuff that he catches me in. But like I said, I was very, very, very happy that I was able to negate all of his opportunities that he took to get me in both a triangle and a what else did he try? He tried a triangle. I almost got him in an arm extension kind of thing, like an arm lock kind of thing. I didn't have his wrist tight enough though, and he was able to pull out of it. But it was really, really close. But anyway, he got close to the triangle, and he tried to armbar me a couple times. And one of the opportunities to armbar me, there's one thing I really like to do, and it's if somebody is keen on armbarring you, is if you can get one of your legs over one of their legs. Like, I like, if they've got my left arm, I like to try and get my right leg on the inside of their left leg and kind of pin it down. And I didn't do that on him today. It wasn't actually necessary because I kept him tight, really, really tight. And I made getting out of my guard a little bit tougher than I don't know. I think other than a little tougher than he would have anticipated or something. I don't know. It seemed like he had a little bit of trouble getting out. But when he did get out, it didn't really require a whole lot of strength. And that's the aspect of jiu-jitsu that I keep missing. Is that I'm a big, strong guy. I mean, when I say big, I'm not really like tall or anything, but I'm strong. And I'm pretty muscular. I understand that about myself. There are guys in my class that are way more muscular than I am, but I'm not exactly weak, is what I'm getting at. And so I'm used to dealing with challenges with strength. And so trying to get it refined down to nice, smooth jiu-jitsu movements is a little more challenging for me than it probably should be. And I'm not exactly 17 years old, so it's not like this is the first time I've moved my body, and it's that much harder to get past like the old ways of doing things and trying to learn new ways of doing things. But nonetheless, I feel like I did learn a little bit today, and I managed to keep my opponent in really, really tight. And I have to work on keeping him in even tighter. The mistake that I made, and I kept making, was that I was trying to reposition for either an armbar or a choke, and I would disengage my guard, and that's not something I can do with that guy. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw down into some music. And as far as what to start off with, it's always a challenge. And I'm feeling the need for some corrosion of conformity. I'll just be honest. And let's see here. What seems like a good song off of this album? Dance of the Dead, here on Coin Metal. First Dance. And that was Prong with Revenge, Best Served Cold. And yes, it most certainly is. And we've been seeing a lot of vengeance come about in the crypto industry as of late, where things have been coming back around. And of course, it seems to me that one of the reasons for it is the increased interest in quote-unquote off-chain bullshit. And that's just my perspective, is that I think a lot of people think they're going to just stack their shit on top of Bitcoin, and we need to build shit on top of Bitcoin. You know what? You don't need to build shit on top of the US dollar, so why do you need to build shit on top of Bitcoin? Why can't you just use Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency as a means of payment? Why does there have to be some smart contract this and, atomic swapper that? And it's a bunch of fucking bullshit. As far as I'm concerned, a lot of that shit is just distractions, really. That the instantaneous nature of cryptocurrencies, or at least most of them, it takes away the necessity for, we have to wait for this to happen, or we have to go according to a set exchange rate, or, we have to commit to a certain exchange. No. You know what? The natural world isn't quote-unquote stable. It is volatile because it is moving. It's got a lot of moving parts to it. And all of the moving parts are trying to get the same amount of incentive they got yesterday, if not more, with less effort. We call it Moore's Law. because that's how it expresses itself in manufacturing. But it's in my mind, it's just a natural progression. And if you guys are into crypto and you're in crypto Twitter, you've probably been seeing a lot of stories recently about how proof of work mining is going to suck up all the energy in the planet, and we're going to bring about the next dark age because we're going to use all the oil trying to hash Bitcoin. And the people that are saying these things, they have absolutely no fucking idea what they're talking about. I mean, my big position on it, and people can argue with me all they want, but this is my last tweet that gives basically the kernel of my thesis concerning this recent study that was done concerning Bitcoin mining. And we're going to get deeper into that tonight. But anyway, so this is basically a kernel of my thesis here. The morons who did the study did it on hardware that wouldn't even exist anywhere but Intel's R&D shelf for another 3 years if it weren't for mining and the way it has pushed hardware development forward. Now, people can deny that as much as they want. But the fact of the matter is that miners want the fastest, cheapest fucking hash power they can get. They want those fucking blocks faster than everybody else. They want those fucking block rewards faster than everybody else. And the way to get that is more efficient hardware or more efficient structure than everybody else. And of course there are other ways, but that's like the primary rule of the game here is outcompete. And you do that by having faster, more efficient hardware or setting it up in a more efficient way. To where you go somewhere where electricity is really cheap, like China or rural America or rural Canada or rural India. But the point being is these are progressions towards quote-unquote efficiency. Doing more with less. Or at least the same amount as you did yesterday with less. And this, when you get into any kind of manufacturing setup, you understand that at least part of the mentality going into the manufacturing process is how do we upgrade so that what we do tomorrow will take less electricity, less money, less effort, but we'll get the same number of units out the door. Any company that's worth a shit, they've got a unit that's all they do. They're talking about reconfiguring the processing floors, reconfiguring the production steps, retiming the machines, changing out machines for new machines. That's all they do. And so when you take that and you put behind it a straight incentive structure that is known, is available to everybody to participate in, and the goal is money. It's like, if you were to hand somebody a shovel and say, hey guy, there's a gold nugget, it's 6 inches under the ground over there, and if you dig on that spot you will get the nugget. That's like the instruction set. Now, there are land movers that are competing with you and your shovel for that nugget. But, you do it long enough, you can actually compete with them. But again, that whole, it cuts out so much of the in-between, So when you're in manufacturing, you have to manufacture the whole thing and then hope that somebody buys it at the end that would justify all of the cost of having made it. All right? And so it's incumbent upon you to be studying what the market demand is. And when the market is telling you, I want faster, smaller, cheaper, cooler, I want. And you listen to those wants and you develop accordingly. And so, like I said, when you're coming into mining and the incentive is so direct, That, it's like you manufacture it right, you sell it, and then the guy that is using it is making money. Like literally making money. He's using that machine to make money. And to, of course, support the network of others just like himself. And the validity of the coin. There are a whole bunch of little incentives, but I think mainly people forget that this is all to replace the necessity to trust anybody in between. I've had people tell me that the miners are a quote-unquote third party. And you're full of shit. You're full of shit. Miners are users. They are the first users of any cryptocurrency. Because they have to convert it and they have to sell it to you before you can convert it or trade it or buy it or whatever. But they are the first users. So this idea that they are quote-unquote third parties, they have a direct skin in the game. I mean, they're the first skin in the game. They've got the hardware. They're burning the fucking electricity. They're occupying the bandwidth. So this idea that they're a quote-unquote third party, they're not a third party in the way that Wells Fargo is a third party. They are the network. No miners, no network. And all of these monkeys with their level 2 and their layer 2 and fucking off-chain lightning that. You know what? All of that shit is dependent upon miners. No miners, no network, no off-chain TXing. Because all of that off-chain TXing requires at least 2 transactions on-chain. And if you're not paying the transaction fees for those 2 transactions, somebody else is. A trusted third party is taking up that responsibility for you and the cost. And they want something for that cost too. Your trust. And the whole reason to be in cryptocurrencies is to not need to trust. To be able to verify directly. But you can't verify if it's off-chain unless you, and the information that you can verify is being supplied to you by the other participants on that off-chain network. What if they're lying to you? You don't know. Anyway, I got a whole bunch of articles here. Let's see here. Political. I was just reading the synopsis or title of this article here, and I don't know if we're going to go into that shit. But anyway, I'm trying to find the article specifically about this study, because first I want to study the study, and then we're gonna debunk the shit. All right, so let's see here. Study Bitcoin mining energy. Bam. No, that's not what we're looking at. Oh, there we go. So, this is probably the article that started it, too, because it's on Motherboard. And this is by Daniel Oberhaus. It was authored October 29th, 2018, 9:02 a.m. Bitcoin mining alone could raise global temperatures above critical limit by 2033. Okay. Let me just take one step back before we even get into this thing. Okay? If you were to do your calculations for profitability of Bitcoin mining back in, say, 2013, and you estimated how many units you would have to purchase to match the average unit that is currently available, it would take probably, I don't know, I would say somewhere between 5 and 10 of the units that were available back in 2013, 2014 when ASICs first came online, and their electricity consumption for the amount of work performed would be a fraction of what the current ones are now. So, I'm just going to say that these people are probably extrapolating based on current energy consumption per hash, or terahash, or petahash, or whatever. And that's not a reliable metric to extrapolate into the future, because you have to keep in mind that every year the units are getting smaller and cooler and more efficient and not using as much electricity as the previous iteration. And we've talked about that on the show, where, you know, from one iteration to another, they're jumping by 40 to 60% efficiency. So you scale that shit out to 2033, and you're going to have a miner about, I don't know, the size of a head of a pin that'd do the same amount of work as one of the miners on your shelf right now. So, yeah, again, that's something to keep in mind, okay? Because if you look at the miners that you have right now, if you bought them since 2017, okay, say you bought them last year, right? If you were to take that unit and compare it to the first runs of ASICs, your one unit is like blowing the doors off of theirs. I mean, it's not even comparable. Anyway, continuing on. Let's see here. If Bitcoin is adopted at rates similar to other technologies like credit cards, it could increase global temperatures by 2 degrees Celsius by 2033, according to a study published on Monday in Nature Climate Change. And we're just going to go straight to the fucking report, because fuck these people. All right. Okay. And this is on nature.com. Bitcoin emissions alone could push global warming above 2 degrees Celsius. Bitcoin is a power-hungry cryptocurrency that is increasingly used as an investment and payment system. Here we show that projected Bitcoin usage, should it follow the rate of adoption of other broadly adopted technologies, could alone produce enough CO2 emissions to push warming above 2 degrees Celsius within less than 3 decades. Oh my god, these fucking people. You couldn't possibly extrapolate the actual energy output or consumption of Bitcoin mining in 3 decades. You couldn't do it for 3 years. Anyway, continuing on. Leaders from 176 countries have ratified the Paris Agreement reached during the 21st Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC COP21 to mitigate GHG emissions and help and keep anthropogenic global warming within 2 degrees Celsius to avoid the impacts of ever more catastrophic climate hazards. Let's see here. Such as drought, heat waves, wildfire storms, floods, and sea level rise, among others. From 1860 to 2014, humanity emitted 584.4 GTC from fossil fuel combustion. I'm supposing that's gigatons of carbon from fossil fuel combustion, industry processes, and land use change, which has been mirrored by a 0.9 Celsius of global warming. Global warming, Greenland Figure 1A. Temperature projections from 42 Earth system models, ESMs. Oh, Jesus Christ, man. I screwed up the view on this. I need to shrink this shit, like, way down. Here, hold on. Okay. That's where I goofed up. I hit the fucking Windows button instead of Control. Here we go. Now we can do this better. Alright, and where were we? Temperature projections from 42 Earth system models, ESMs, developed for recent coupled model intercomparison project phase 5, CMIP5, under 4 alternative emission scenarios show that an additional 231.4 to 744.8 GTC would push global warming across the 2 Celsius threshold. And let's see here. reducing emissions to keep warming below 2 Celsius is already regarded as a very difficult challenge given the increasing human population and consumption, as well as lack of political will. Then came Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a decentralized cashless payment system. Not true at all. It is cash. Digital cash is a decentralized digital cash payment system introduced in early 2009, and it is now accepted by over 100,000 merchants and vendors worldwide. Each transaction paid for with Bitcoin is compiled into a block that requires computationally demanding proof of work to be resolved, which in turn uses large amounts of electricity. Based on the assumptions of that 60% of the economic return of the Bitcoin transaction verification process goes to electricity. At $5 per kilowatt hour, 5 cents per kilowatt hour, and 0.7 kilograms of CO2 equivalent to CO2e emitted per kilowatt hour. Digiconomists estimated that Bitcoin usage emits 33.5 metric tons of CO2e annually as of May 2018. Photianus repeated this approach by using emissions adjusted by a broader life cycle of electricity generation and found that for 2017, the global emissions from Bitcoin and Ethereum usage were 43.9 metric tons of CO2e. What's CO2e? Compiling data on the electricity consumption of the various computing systems used for Bitcoin verification at present and the emissions from electricity production in the countries of the companies that performed such computing, we estimated that in 2017, Bitcoin usage emitted 69 metric tons of CO2e globally. Globally, 314.2 billion cashless transactions are carried out every year, of which Bitcoin's share was 0.033% in 2017. The environmental concern regarding Bitcoin usage arrives from the large carbon footprint for such a small share of global cashless transactions and the potential for it to be more broadly used under current technologies. Bitcoin usage has experienced an accelerated growth, supplementary figure 1, which is a common pattern during the early adoption of broadly used technologies. Should Bitcoin follow the median growth trend observed in the adoption of several other technologies, it could equal the global total of cashless transactions in under 100 years. Pfft. Dude, you're being really fucking modest there. Yet the cumulative emissions of such usage growth could fall within the range of emissions likely to warm the planet by 2 degrees Celsius within only 16 years. Red line in figure 1b. The cumulative emissions of Bitcoin usage will cross the 2 degrees Celsius threshold within 22 years if the current rate is similar to some of the slowest broadly adopted technologies, or within 11 years if adopted at the fastest rate at which other technologies have been incorporated. That is the red area in figure 1b. Projections in this analysis assume that the portfolio of fuel types used to generate electricity remains fixed at today's values. And I'll tell you one place where they're probably wrong there is if mining goes the way I think it should go, or probably will go actually, is where people like you and me are doing the broadest share of the mining, that in the future, the huge warehouses full of miners, that's going to be a thing of the past. That it's going to be too much money to try and keep up with the development cycles of miners. You know, that they'll be coming out with newer, faster miners at such a rapid pace and by such a diversity of suppliers that trying to fill a warehouse full of miners and keep it full of new miners is going to be so much more effort than it is now that it's not going to be worth it. I mean, by the time you're ready to spin up your miners, your shit's already deprecated by months. Anyway, continuing on. The future usage of Bitcoin is a topic of considerable discussion. There is currently considerable economic motivation for companies to compute the proof of work for each Bitcoin block. For example, the latest block on the 8th of May 2018, block 521,819, gave a reward of 12.5 Bitcoins plus 0.1 Bitcoin for transaction fees, with a total monetary value of $116.04 on that date's exchange rate. The expected time needed to resolve that proof of work is around 10 minutes. However, Bitcoin is set up in such a way that rewards should have every 210,000 blocks, or approximately every 4 years. For example, 50 Bitcoins in 2008, 25 Bitcoins in 2012, and so on. Over time, this could reduce the motivation for companies to resolve the computationally demanding proof of work for each block, potentially overwhelming the system and reducing general interest in the use of Bitcoin. Alternatively, Bitcoin usage may generate sufficient transaction fees to support the system, which is how Bitcoin was originally conceived. And to note on that, what would facilitate that would be a vast increase in the block size, say 64 megabytes. That would also increase the number of transactions that it is capable of doing for its large energy footprint. Continuing on. Although we are unable to predict the fate of Bitcoin, our analysis suggests that if its rate of adoption follows broadly used technologies, it could create an electricity demand capable of producing enough emissions to exceed the 2 Celsius of global warming in just a few decades. Given the decentralized nature of Bitcoin and the need to maximize economic profits, its computing verification process is likely to migrate to places where electricity is cheaper, suggesting that electricity decarbonization could help mitigate Bitcoin's carbon footprint, but only where the cost of electricity from renewable sources is cheaper than fossil fuels, and China is on their way to doing that. However, reducing Bitcoin's carbon footprint should not rest solely on some yet-to-be-developed hardware, but include simple modifications to the overall system, such as adding more transactions per block. Oh my god, the fucking UN gets it! Bigger motherfucking blocks! Or reducing the difficulty or time required to resolve the proof of work, both of which could result in the immediate electricity reductions for Bitcoin usage. Our analysis is... let's see if we can get back to actual text here. Based on Bitcoin alone. However, the problem of high electricity consumption is common to several cryptocurrencies, suggesting that any further development of cryptocurrencies should critically aim to reduce electricity demand if the potential devastating consequences of 2 degrees Celsius of global warming are to be avoided. Online content. Any methods, additional references, nature research reporting summaries, source data, statements of data availability, and associated accession codes are available at blah blah blah. We're not going to go into that. Let's see if there's any more text to this. Okay. And I guess we're going into their methodology, but we're pretty damn close to the end, so we'll just go on. Methods. Amount of CO2e needed to surpass the 2 degrees Celsius COP21 target. The 2015 Paris Agreement set the goal to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. To quantify the amount of CO2e emissions required to warm the planet by 2 degrees Celsius, that is, CO2e emissions plus the CO2e emissions of other anthropogenic GHGs, We used temperature projections from ESMs and the driving CO2e emissions of such models. For each ESM, we estimated that the CO2e emissions at which 2 degrees Celsius warming was reached, the x-axis value at which each narrow line in Figure 1a intercepted with the 2 degrees Celsius warming threshold, and grouped those results to estimate the 5th and 95th percentiles. We also collected data on observed temperature change and CO2e emissions from 1860 to 2014 as a validation for model projections to quantify the current warming and cumulative emissions, and estimate these CO2e emissions needed to surpass the COP21 target. The observed temperature change and CO2e emissions since 1860 are shown as a green line in Figure 1a, temperature data from NOAA-Series 20th Century Reanalysis, V2C and CO2e emissions data from Carbon Dioxide Information Analysis Center. The observed and projected cumulative CO2e emissions are very similar over the time period for which they overlap. See blue and green lines for Figure 1a. However, they use different models and emission sources. Fossil fuel emissions, industrial process, and land use change are the main anthropogenic GHG contributing to current warming, and are all in common to both databases used in this analysis. Temperature projections. We analyzed global annual average surface air temperature from 42 ESMs, developed for CMIP5. We used the historical experiment, which for all models includes the period of time from 1860 to 2005, and representative concentration pathways, RCPs 2.6, 4.5, and 8.5, which include the period from 2006 to 2100. The historical experiment was designed to model recent climate change, reflecting changes due to both anthropogenic and natural causes, whereas the RCP scenarios represent contrasting mitigation efforts between rapid GHG reductions, RCP 2.6, and a business-as-usual scenario, RCP 8.5. For each model under each experiment, we calculated the difference in the global average temperature between every year in the time series and 1860. For any given experiment, global annual averages from all models at any given year were used to estimate the multi-model median temperature change for that year. Thick lines in Figure 1a. Temperature change for each model and the multi-model median are shown in Figure 1a. CO2e projections. Although CO2 is the primary GHG contributing to the total anthropogenic radiative forcing, changes in the Earth's energy balance due to human activities, other anthropogenic agents also contribute to the warming trends projected by ESMs, such as methane, aerosols, and so on. During the time frame of the study, volcanic and solar radiative forcings have remained reasonably constant and proportionally very small in relation to the anthropogenic forcing, indicating that they contribute minimally to the warming trends from ESMs, and thus were not considered in this analysis. They probably should have been anyway. If nothing more than to establish a firm baseline, they probably should have been. For the purposes of standardization, we calculated the CO2e emissions for the radiative forcing from all anthropogenic activities used by the historical and RCP experiments. For this purpose, we obtained CO2 emissions, their radiative forcing, and the total anthropogenic radiative forcing under each experiment. Data from Schusen et al. We estimate that the CO2e emissions for the total anthropogenic radiative forcing is the amount of CO2e required to achieve the total anthropogenic radiative forcing given the ratio of actual CO2 emissions and the actual CO2 radiative forcing. As an example, from 1860 until 2005, the historical experiment shows that the cumulative CO2 emissions from fossil fuels, cement, gas flaring, bunker fuels, and land use amounted to 453.247 gigatons of carbon, I guess? GTC, whatever that is. And a resulting radiative forcing of 1.675 Wm to the negative 2, whereas total anthropogenic radiative forcing was 1.840 Wm to the negative 2. Thus, the CO2e emissions for that total anthropogenic radiative forcing were estimated to be 497.984 GTC. Projected anthropogenic CO2e emissions under different experiments are plotted against temperature change from different models in Figure 1a. Note that the CO2e emissions were given in weight units of carbon, which can be converted into units of carbon dioxide. Simply multiply these estimates by 3.667. Amount of CO2e produced by Bitcoin usage. Any given transaction using Bitcoin is compiled into a block requiring a proof of work to be resolved, with the winning company/pool being awarded a certain amount of new Bitcoins plus any extra transaction fees. If the CO2e emissions from this procedure emerge primarily from the electricity demands of the hardware used and the location where the electricity is generated, to assess the carbon footprint of the total Bitcoin network, using as reference the year 2017, we used the following approach. We started by compiling a list of current hardware suitable for Bitcoin and their energy efficiencies, hashes per electricity consumed in Supplementary Table 1, to each block mined in 2017, data from blocktrail.com. And we're going to right-click on that one just to do it. Ah, damn it, Jim. No. Hopefully you didn't get... Oh, thank you. We assigned a random hardware from Supplementary Table 1 and multiplied the number of hashes required to solve the block by the energy efficiency of the random hardware. This returned the amount of electricity consumed to solve the given block. Note that the available data for mined blocks include their difficulty, which can be used to estimate the number of hashes. Hashes equals difficulty times 2 to the 32nd, equation from O'Dwyer and Malone. For each block mined in 2017, we also collected data on the company claiming the given block and searched for their country/countries of operation. Supplementary Table 2. For the resulting list of countries, we collected data on the types of fuels used for electricity generation and using average standards of CO2e emissions for the generation of electricity with those types of fuels under a life cycle carbon approach. Supplementary Table 4. We estimated the total carbon emission equivalents to produce electricity in those countries. Supplementary Table 2. By multiplying the electricity consumption of every block in 2017 by the electricity emissions in the country where the proof of work was likely to be resolved, we were able to estimate the total CO2e emissions for computing every block in 2017. Summing the CO2e emissions from all blocks in 2017 yielded the Bitcoin emissions in that year. This approach was repeated 1,000 times to capture the variability in the random selection of hardware, and this is described as the S.D. Projected usage and carbon emissions from Bitcoin. The likely future of Bitcoin has been broadly discussed in online forums, with opinions ranging from it being a case of boom and bust, or alternatively, an early stage in a new industrial revolution. We studied the carbon emissions of Bitcoin if it follows the adoption trends of other broadly used technologies. For this, we used the incorporation rate of 40 different technologies for which data are readily available. The automatic transmission, automobile, cable TV, cellular phone, central heating, color TV, computer, credit card, dishwasher, disc brakes, dryer, ebook reader, electric power, blah, 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 a lot of other bullshit. Let's see, internet, landline, real-time gross settlement adoption, running water and shipping container infrastructure, blah, 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 and credit cards reference. Data include the year and percentage of population using the given technology. They were talking a whole bunch of different technologies. One thing that I think they probably missed in all of those, that they probably didn't bother to check out, is if they took 20 years of home air conditioning, just one out of the list of energy consumptions that they were talking about here. If they were to just take it over a 20-year period and evaluate the change in efficiency per unit over that 20-year period, they also would have noted that over time, the units are smaller, consume less electricity, and are far more efficient. Now, if they would have applied that inverse relationship for that, just for that 20-year period, if they would have plotted that on top of Bitcoin, they would have noted that that Bitcoin actually is ahead of the curve with regard to efficiency. But it's because there's a much more direct relationship between efficiency and getting paid. Anyway, continuing on. Real-time, blah, blah, blah. Water heater, credit card system. Data include year and percentage of population using the given technology. The first year of usage for each technology was set to 1 to allow comparison of trends among technologies. Narrow gray lines in Figure 1b. For each year, we calculated the average and lower and upper quantiles of the percent of population using all technologies and applied a logistic model to such trends. The red line and red line shading in Figure 1b. The projected trends of technology usage adoption were used to estimate likely Bitcoin usage, assuming a global total of 314.2 billion cashless transactions. We used only cashless transactions that are likely to occur in places where infrastructure is already in place for the usage of Bitcoin as a reference. For example, we do not assume that Bitcoin will replace transactions using fiat currency. That's a bad assumption there. The CO2e emissions of projected Bitcoin usage were estimated using the CO2e emissions for Bitcoin transactions in 2017 as a reference. We randomly sampled blocks mined in 2017 until their total number of transactions were equal to the projected number of transactions. Then we added the CO2e emissions from computing such randomly selected blocks. The approach was repeated 1,000 times. Code availability, raw code used for the study was publicly data available. Alright, so that was the end of this thing. Okay, a few little flaws, and like I said, as I see it, the energy efficiency of Bitcoin has done nothing but go up. Meaning that every year, shit, who am I fooling? It's practically every month. Somebody comes out with some little tweak, some little development, and they release it out to the public, and 2 months later, that's the miner to have, right? Well, the effects that's going to have is going to change vastly the power consumption model that they're using here, because each unit is going to be using less electricity. And chances are you'll require less of the units to do the same amount of mining, so you'll probably add units too. So there's an offset there. Anyway, continuing on with this is that, number one, I think that the number of developers and the number of people getting into mining is going to increase vastly. And some people think that it'll go to like an IoT thing, that, you know, you'll have a chip in everything that you own that's like botnetted together and mining for you, or mining for somebody else behind your back. It could go either way. But I think that the best mining is done by knowing miners, knowing willing miners, people that are knowingly dedicating hardware, electricity, and bandwidth to the effort of mining. And one thing that I see also as a tweak here is that when you're talking about mining, I'm thinking about something that could eventually be like a self-elected kind of thing, you know, that you save up some money, you buy some miners, and then you start the race, right? Where you're buying new ones and reinvesting in your hardware and stuff as you go on. In addition to that, though, is this. When you decide to become a miner, right, you're no longer going to and from work. You're no longer driving somewhere to work for somebody else, because you're up to your ass in maintaining your own hardware and trying to make that money. And so the energy consumption of you will probably go down as far as fossil fuels are concerned, because rather than driving to and from work 5 days a week, you are already at work when you get up in the morning. So again, I think there's a couple little tweaks in their ideation here. I mean, I think that the biggest mistake you can make is extrapolating based on what you currently know about mining, and regardless of which coin we're talking about or which hardware we're talking about. All you can go on is the available data, but the available data is invariably wrong. Wrong. I mean, we can make some educated guesses and whatnot, but in the long run, we always end up wrong. It's just off by a little bit. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw back down into some music before we get into the efforts to debunk this bad boy. And as far as what we're going to throw down next, I'm feeling the need for some Rivers of Nile here. And so, let's go with it. A Home. Here we go. Rivers of Nile. A Home. Here on Coin Metal. And that was Body Count with Back to Rehab. I'll tell you what, in reading some of the stuff on my Twitter feed today, I definitely feel like some people definitely need to be going back to rehab. Like this one. This one is kind of interesting. Howard Dean. Gab should be tried as an accomplice to murder in synagogue slayings. I'm not going to read this fucking article, but I just wanted to tell you, Howard, go fuck yourself. According to that precedent, Twitter should have been shut down a long time ago because of what the comms that they facilitated with regard to the Arab Spring. Same could be said for, YouTube, Facebook, half a dozen other social media outlets where people were communicating with one another and doing some pretty dastardly things, and also conveying to the rest of the world what was really going on within their borders. And I think that's the threat that these people really see with regard to social media. See, the fact that they're going after Gab, I don't think it has anything to do with the fucking synagogue shit. I think it has more to do with the fact that people have been transitioning from Facebook and Twitter over to Gab and other social media outlets that aren't so quick to rat their users out to their governments. And I think this is the point where a lot of these politicians are really trying to overstep their bounds. They have no business telling Gab what the fuck to do. They have no business trying to coerce them in this way, where, there was nothing that Gab actually did wrong. I've seen shit on Twitter that would make you turn white. But, nobody's saying, hey, let's shut down Twitter. I've seen shit on Facebook. During the BitConnect run-up, all over my Twitter, all over my Facebook. BitConnect! We all knew it was a fucking scam, but it was all over the fucking place. I mean, really, if we're gonna exercise this kind of censorship and oversight on social media, let's hold everybody to account. I don't give a fuck that we're talking about the FANG companies. Let's hold Google to account. They own YouTube. Oh, how many videos on YouTube have there been that would have been quote-unquote objectionable to Mr. Howard Dean? You know, or that would convey images and messages that he would object to or would seek to have terminated. Why aren't we hearing about, oh yeah, that's right, because these companies collect our information and sell it directly to our government. And maybe Gab isn't so willing to do that, and that's why they're getting this kind of pressure. Which, I gotta say, fuck you, Howard. You know? Fuck you and fuck all the people like you that think that our communicating outside of your permission is such a threat. The fact of the matter is that we'll continue to use social media outlets that you don't even fucking know about yet. That you probably won't know about until it's all too late. Until we've already voted you out. You know, I had a discussion about the upcoming midterms with my dad. And it was really enlightening, because he felt like there were a lot of things that were happening that he was seeing on the news and whatnot that were meant to affect the outcome of the elections. And all I have to say is this, that if there have been politicians that have been complicit in the abuse of their people, they're probably going to be held to account of, at least at the election booth, you know? And there's nothing that can stop that. If people look around and their fucking existence sucks more and they're paying more in taxes, they're probably not going to feel all that good about it. And it doesn't matter what we say on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter about it, because the sentiment to look for other options will already be there in their minds. You know, I think it's just a mystery to be striking at the symptom and people communicating to one another about the symptoms and the realities around them. You know, let's see, what's going on here? It looks like my program is kind of twigging out on me. It's kind of weird how this happens. Right when I'm getting into a nice rant, you know, something hangs up, and it's just weird how, you know, the shit just happens. But, you know, I'm able to get back on and do my thing, and so, you know, what do I care, right? You know, and beyond that, we also record these, so we'll be disseminating them later to the public. So yeah, anyway, let's get back into exactly what we've been talking about today. And this one's on Forbes, and it's interesting that, you know, you have to pay attention to who's saying what, right? So this is on Forbes under, I guess, innovation. This is October 29th, 2018 at 12 p.m. Authored by Andrea Morris. Clearly, no penis. And quite attractive looking, too. Bitcoin predicted to be the nail in the coffin of climate change. Bitcoin alone could push global temperatures over the 2 degrees Celsius catastrophic threshold by 2034 if the cryptocurrency gets adopted at the pace as other broadly used technologies, says a new report in the journal Nature of Climate Change. You're forgiven if you aren't familiar with a digital currency that could single-handedly devastate the planet. Quote, since 6 months ago, I wasn't either, says Camilo Mora, who lead author of the study. When the co-author Katie Telladay first proposed analyzing Bitcoin's emissions, Mora thought she was kidding. I thought, it's a video game. What came of the analysis floored the research team. Reducing emissions to keeping, from the paper, quote, reducing emissions to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius is already regarded as a very difficult challenge given the increasing human population and consumption as well as a lack of political will. And then came Bitcoin. Let's check something out here really quick. Oh, looks like we're still connected. Okay. Just had to check and verify whether or not I was still connected to the station there. Oops. The estimated emissions produced by Bitcoin last year alone is 69 million metric tons of CO2. Moore calls the numbers mind-blowing. Quote, and I bet you it was less than that. That is the source of concern for us. If this technology is so insignificant and the footprint is so big, could you imagine if this thing were to take off? As Bitcoin gains popularity, its energy demands increase dramatically. Quote, we don't have a single thing, not agriculture, not transportation, that we can think of that in 2 decades would be enough to warm the planet by 2 degrees. But Bitcoin can. That's a bunch of bullshit. What's causing the emissions explosion? Oh, I don't know, maybe bombing the shit out of Libya and Syria and other places on the planet might have something to do with it. I don't know. That's just me. Silly. Bitcoin miners are the reason for the ugly energy report card. Bitcoin has no central bank. It's peer-to-peer decentralized network for digital currency. Let's see here. Get out of the way here so I can actually see what the fucking status is. Alright, cool. Alright. Let's see. It's like a folder with a complicated math problem inside as the key. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a minute here. What's causing what's causing the emission explosion? Bitcoin miners are the reason for the ugly report card. Bitcoin has no central bank. It's a peer-to-peer decentralized network for digital currency. Bitcoin purchases generate blocks of data. It's like a folder with a complicated math problem inside as the key. A miner is simply anyone who wants to join the Bitcoin network and owns powerful Bitcoin processing hardware necessary to support the software capable of solving the key and verifying the Bitcoin. This makes Bitcoin super hard to counterfeit. As compensation for providing this level of computationally intensive security, miners get a percentage of the Bitcoins they verify. But verification takes an enormous amount of energy, and as Bitcoin gets more broadly adopted, the energy demands increase perilously. The current analysis suggests mining data for profit is even more destructive to the planet than mining the planet itself for profit. Actually, that's bullshit. Just transporting US dollars takes up more energy than all the Bitcoin mining going on. Continuing on. Research methods. The researchers incorporated previous peer-reviewed methods from Digiconomist in their analysis and tracked the power efficiency of hardware used for Bitcoin mining with the geographic location of miners and the CO2 emissions of producing electricity in those regions. Let's see. Another of the paper's authors, Randy Rollins, says their dire estimates are quite conservative, and they're full of shit too. The hardware requirements for mining Bitcoin generate a lot of heat. The energy needed to cool the Bitcoin mining rigs weren't even factored into the emissions estimates. Of course not, because we're mining in places where it's really fucking cold. Is there any chance both Bitcoin and the planet can survive? Yes. Bitcoin is public and transparent. There's no vetting process for miners. Anyone can become one, which is why there are no emission standards applicable to miners. It may seem like Bitcoin is an ecological fail in global libertarian experiments. Ironically, many Bitcoin advocates who champion libertarian values say it's up to governments, not Bitcoin, to impose standards. No. I have never heard a single fucking libertarian ever tell me we should regulate Bitcoin's energy standards with the government. Never. So I don't know what you're fucking talking about there. Continuing on. An argument can be made that Bitcoin's emissions trajectory is no more Bitcoin's fault as it is humanity's fault for not hastening the transition to renewable energy. And to this point, I'd like to tell you that it's my thesis that Bitcoin will actually push the transition to renewable energy. Continuing on. The authors of today's paper argue that given its impact, Bitcoin needs to take an active role in solving the problem. One possible way for Bitcoin to reduce its footprint might be to make the keys easier to solve, but this could potentially leave the currency more vulnerable to counterfeit. And if it's easier to solve, more miners get into the market, thereby maintaining or increasing the emissions footprint as adoption increases. Actually, no, we've already talked about that. As more people get into mining, they are doing less travel, unless they're doing travel via airplane, and that travel is already happening, whether or not they are actually on the plane. Continuing on. Quote, "We cannot predict the future of Bitcoin." No shit. But if implemented at a rate even close to the slowest pace at which other technologies have been incorporated, it will spell very bad news for climate change and the people and species impacted by that, says Mora via press release. Quote, "With the ever-growing devastation created by hazardous climate conditions, humanity is coming to terms with the fact that climate change is as real and personal as it can be. We would not deny that, but mining isn't a big contributor. Clearly, any further development of cryptocurrencies should critically aim to reduce electricity demand if the potential devastating consequences of 2 degrees Celsius of global warming are to be avoided." Well, let me put it to you this way, dude. It is incumbent upon miners to try and reduce their expenses and produce more. These are two equally important drivers. That also means using less fucking electricity. Get it? Continuing on. I report on different kinds of intelligence, plant, animal, human, and machine. I wrote a book, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah. Whatever. So that was the end of the sub-analysis of the analysis. And, yeah. Third-hand reporting is always as accurate as you expect it to be. Although Andrea did stick to the facts of the report, she didn't do too much, I want to say thinking, but analysis would have been better. Because it's clear that she thought about it. But, again, analysis and possible personal contribution, I believe, would have been in order. But anyway, continuing on, I think the mismark here is that they did not, according to what I observed anyway, consider the actual energy efficiency over time. If you were to compare the miners, like I was saying, in 2012, 2013, when ASICs first came online, I think it might have actually been 2014. Anyway, when the ASICs first came online, if you were to project from then to now, there's no way that the miners that were available in 2014 would be able to supply the amount of hash power that is currently operating on the Bitcoin network. It's not possible. What that tells you is that the devices are getting more powerful and more efficient over time. And so, that whole Moore's Law thing, we talk about it every once in a while when we get serious about shit. And we face reality that things are getting faster, things are getting more efficient, and it's because there's a bunch of fucking engineers that's all they do all day long is how do we make this go more efficient than we did last year? And I still posit that not only will mining reduce its own carbon footprint over time, it will also reduce the carbon footprint of all other computing devices produced in this era. The improvements that happen in efficiency in Bitcoin miners do not just stay in Bitcoin miners. They also go into your fucking cell phone, your tablet, your desktop, your laptop, your tablet, all that shit. Your router for your internet, all of it gets impacted. You know, when they scale down to spec, you know, they go down from, you know, what is it, 16 nanometers down to 10 nanometers and then down to 7 nanometers. Those are iteration changes that, if spanned throughout the rest of the architecture, would shrink everything and make it more powerful, more energy efficient, and cooler and smaller. And I mean, it's not like you need some graph to tell you this shit, man. I mean, dig around in some box that you got all your old cell phones in. Dig one out from 2010. If you can get the damn thing to charge and power on, post it. And then compare it to the phone that you carry around all day long. If it was made since 2016, it's most definitely been impacted by the improvements made in mining. So again, we're not only going to reduce the carbon footprint of mining, we are going to reduce the carbon footprint of all computing as time goes on. Maybe even change some of the computing that is going on and make it into an infrastructure that is monetizable by the individual as opposed to just Google. But now we get into the meat of the counter argument. And I got this thing on thinkprogress.org. Experts debunk, quote, dangerous and misleading study hyping Bitcoin energy use. Study claims, quote, Bitcoin emissions alone could push global warming above 2 degrees Celsius, but it only uses 0.1% of global power as of 2018. This is by Joe Rahm. It was authored October 29, 2018 at 12:36 p.m. Continuing on. It's Halloween week, so it's time for another scary story about how the popular cryptocurrency Bitcoin will destroy the world through its energy use. Quote, Bitcoin mining on track to consume all world's energy by 2020, a frightening Newsweek headline claimed a year ago. Now it's the journal Natural Climate Change with a brand new horror story of its own, titled Bitcoin emissions alone could push global warming above 2 degrees Celsius. Supposedly, this could occur as early as 2033. But Think Progress interviewed 3 leading experts on the subject of information technology, IT energy use, who were all highly critical of the study's assumptions, analysis, and ultimate conclusions. First, Bitcoin energy consumption has been more overhyped than Bitcoin itself. I'd have to agree with that statement there. As Dr. John Koomey, who was as Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory LBNL scientist for more than 2 decades, explained to Think Progress, calculations of Bitcoin energy use are complicated. So, quote, one thing we should not do is recklessly extrapolate recent growth rates for Bitcoin into the future, as the Nature Climate Change article published today, Monday, appears to do, wrote Koomey in an analysis published Monday. Quote, I cannot emphasize enough how dangerous, irresponsible... You know what? Let's check his fucking analysis and see how long it is. Well, yeah. This is good enough to go into too. We're going to follow it up with this dude's direct shit. Quote, I cannot emphasize how dangerous, irresponsible, and misleading such extrapolations can be, he writes, and no credible analysis should ever extrapolate in this manner, nor should readers of reports on this topic fall for this well-known mistake. Keeping total global warming below 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, requires a laser-like focus on the big sources of carbon pollution, like transportation, buildings, and industry, So, it's dangerous and irresponsible to create the impression that it's even harder than we thought, and that we have to devote vast resources to a new area of focus, especially when that impression is built around very misleading analysis. Creating a new Bitcoin and verifying a transaction using so-called blockchain proof-of-work technology consumes electricity, but exactly how much is widely debated. It's in part because anyone, and indeed everyone, who can solve very complicated computational problems can validate transactions and in turn earn Bitcoin. Here's one of the popular video explanations of this complex scheme. Because of the central process behind Bitcoin transactions is computationally intensive, it is electricity intensive. This drives Bitcoin miners toward ever greater computing power and electricity consumption, especially as Bitcoin soared to value in 2017. But calculating how much total electricity is being used around the world for every Bitcoin transaction is a very complicated task, which is why many experts are criticizing recent assertions regarding the scale of energy intensity tied to Bitcoin, like those in this new study. Mechanical engineering professor Eric Massenet told Think Progress, quote, "We can debunk their analysis pretty handily by pointing to three egregious flaws." Massenet, who leads the Energy and Resource Systems Analysis Lab at Northwestern University, explained, quote, "We know the global power sector is decarbonizing and that IT, including cryptocurrency data mining, are becoming much more energy efficient. It appears that the authors have overlooked these two latter trends in their projections, as we have surmised." The third egregious flaw, as Massenet said, is, quote, "simultaneously insisting on tremendous growth in cryptocurrency adoption, resulting in inflated and dubious estimates of future carbon emissions." Lawrence Berkeley National Lab research scientist Armin Shahabi agreed, quote, "The authors appear to have focused their analysis on a very unlikely scenario, when where the electricity demand of individual Bitcoin transactions and the carbon emissions from that electricity demand both remain static over the next 100 years, while at the same time Bitcoin immediately undergoes rapid adoption. Unfortunately, the article's attention on the results from this unlikely scenario obscures just how unlikely they are. Shahabi said it's absurd to assume the energy consumption of those systems would remain about the same for the next 100 years. Quote, "That's a crazy assumption in general, but downright bananas for blockchain mining," Shahabi said, quote, "which has already increased efficiency by an order of magnitude or more in the last few years. Indeed, some of the top universities and companies are working to make blockchain more efficient, as CNBC reported in February. Some are pursuing a different validation process that would be vastly less computationally and energy intensive." Kumi, author of the book Turning Numbers into Knowledge, explained that the most credible calculation for the current energy consumption by Bitcoin is just 0.1% of total global electricity, which is a long way from threatening the climate. According to these experts, the Bitcoin energy crisis has been overhyped, and to the extent that there is wasteful energy use, top engineers and professors are working to solve the problem. "We have a problem, and we need your help to solve it." Think Progress is being targeted by ad networks for producing controversial political content because we cover the nationalism and controversial blah, 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 blah. Okay, yeah, we're not going to do that. Anyway, so yeah, I think they're correct that the energy consumption of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency mining in general is being overhyped. And if you really have to think about who might be doing the overhyping, you're not really thinking all that hard. I mean, really, the banks have been invested in Bitcoin at least peripherally, by like 2013, I want to say they were already dabbling significantly in cryptocurrencies. So the idea that that they would be any more amenable to public networks today than they were back then is kind of naive, really. I think they are just as much in opposition of you being able to mine as they ever have been, and that right now they're going through the process of trying to FUD you away from the effort. And, I'd like to, yell at, don't fall for it, all that. You know what? It's up to you. I would rather that you actually got into the game, kid. But, again, that is up to you. It's not something that I can tell you to do directly. And, I can, but I'd rather not. Because I think that's an instruction that you really have to follow with your heart. And you really should be considering the coins that you want to support right off the bat, And that is a decision that you have to make on your own. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw back down into some music. Escape from the Prison Planet by Clutch. I know I play it a lot, but I love this fucking song. Here on Coin Metal. And that was Crowbar with Conquering. A little bit of that NOLA sludge. Anywho, yeah, as we're winding it down here, just like you to take the time to investigate these assertions concerning cryptocurrencies and their mining consumption, the electricity that's being consumed in it. And really, when you're trying to decide which kind of cryptocurrency or which cryptocurrency specifically to mine, consider again not only its today measurements, like how many people are using it today, but try and look ahead, try and check the adoption rate of it, how many miners have come online to it over time. And consider these things carefully when you're deciding exactly where you want to dedicate your electricity, your hardware, and your bandwidth. Because it is kind of a commitment. You're trying to ensure the integrity of other people's transactions as well as be rewarded for having done so. And try to take it as seriously as that. You're definitely, you're literally replacing banks in the whole scheme of things. You're replacing these trust brokers with a trustless global network. And, really, when considering the challenge being met by the public, I might add, I'd have to say that I really think that we are on path to a much more prosperous future for all of us. That in the longer term, mining itself will become something that the average person can do again, and that it will be efficient to do so in your own home. And the hashing power that you're putting out is going to be on par with the mining factories that are going on right now. I really do believe this, that the intrinsic relationship between mining and the development of other hardware, it's just going to sustain itself. It's kind of like the nuclear thing, where I have a nuclear weapon, so you have to have a nuclear weapon, so you're safe from me threatening you with my nuclear weapon. And then we start looking for other people that don't have nuclear weapons to point our nuclear weapons at, in addition to one another, of course. And so that was like nuclear proliferation, and that wasn't very good for anybody else because of the output wasn't just nuclear bombs. It was a bunch of toxic waste that we really couldn't place anywhere safely. And so and we still have a lot of those nukes running around, I might add. Although some kid thought up a way to turn that into renewable electricity via some sort of fission model. But anyway, the point being that none of these forms are static. The current miners that are currently operating will be deprecated within the next year, probably, if not that quick, certainly by the year after, they will be deprecated and off of the shelves and replaced by something far more efficient that consumes much less electricity and produces far less noise, but produces way more hashes as well. And I think it's those changes, that Moore's Law, it always catches up to us. It always reminds us that it is there. It's a force of nature. And the pursuit of efficiency will continue to bear it out. And it is with that I'd like to close out this episode. Thank you very, very much for listening. I certainly do appreciate the support. We will be back again on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so until then, I'd like y'all to trade safe. Do your homework. And watch out for your own bunghole, because Nature Magazine is not going to do it for you. Thank you again for listening. And as far as our last dance is concerned, let's see. Just because we're in the FUD mode, I'm going to throw it down. Exodus, Fabulous Disaster, Last Dance here on Coin Metal. Thank you again for listening, and y'all have an excellent evening.